name is Takuzwa, and I'm at the University of Pretoria. The paper that I'll share with you is titled AI, Data Sovereignty and Governance in Africa, Navigating the Legal and Technical Challenges. So what I did in this paper, I was just trying to look at the AI legislation that we have on the continent and what are some of the challenges that it presents for us moving forward and how we can navigate around that. So in my introduction, I start by discussing what AI means for us in Africa and what is its potential and some of the challenges that we have had when it comes to AI regulation and data sovereignty. And I go on to discuss the national, in brief, the national data protection laws across the continent, and also give the aims of the study. So what I try to do is have a look at the data protection laws and AI legislation across all 55 states across the continent and try to identify which countries have AI-specific legislation and which countries have AI strategies. So what I did is I made a table of all states and examining which, and then also in that table, that's where I made a list of which countries have AI-specific legislation, which one have AI strategies, and which one do not have, and also to what extent are these implemented. So that's what I did. And the methodology, this was a qualitative test-based study, so I didn't really have interviews, but what I did was look at the legislation where I couldn't find. I went on the website of some organizations and NGOs to find out and get information from those websites, and also some of the reports in terms of the progress that the countries had, because I also try to, where some of the legislation has been proposed or it has not been passed through Parliament, I also make note of that. And where there's some challenges when implementing those legislation, I also made note of that. And after that, I also discussed the regulatory gap on the continent, because we do have some data protection laws, but when it comes to AI, driven data, we don't really have legislation that is governing that, and there's some limitations in that regard. So after that, I also discuss some of the challenges that it poses us not having this legislation. And I also go on to discuss some of the regional and continental AI regulation initiatives that have been put in place or been put forward. For one of them is the Malabo Convention, but this mostly focused on cybersecurity and personal data protection, but it also speaks to how the continent in general can try to establish a continental AI strategy to help some of its member states, and also emphasize a robust legal framework and AI governance that will promote the continent. And I also go on to highlight some of the main challenges that we have experienced using case studies in terms of not having robust or AI-specific legislation in certain cases. So I do put some of the case studies, and I also mentioned the risk of data colonization, which is already going on, and I give evidence of this, and I put 3 cases. The first one is transnational mobile money and data ecosystem. So because we don't really have AI legislation or AI legislation that is governing transnational mobile money in the continent, some of the regional transactions, they are at risk for data colonization. And there's also outsourced surveillance. So in terms of sovereignty, some of these states that we have on the continent that do not have AI legislation, they are at risk of data colonization in this form. And then it also leads to algorithmic bias as well. So if we don't have legislation that is governing how AI is being used, especially to the region, that puts at risk. And I go on to provide recommendation in terms of how we can address this challenge across the continent, and how we can, first of all, improve or address the legislation gap, considering the risk that it presents for us. and how we can strengthen capacity of some states that already have some form of AI legislation, but it has not been implemented, or there are some challenges in implementing it. And also, thirdly, I also recommend on how private and public stakeholders can get involved in this process to ensure that the legislation that we do end up with as a continent or even a separate state reflects the values and the priorities that we have in terms of our development goals, and also make sure that the legislation that we have does not harm individuals on the continent, but also it respects our values and our systems and also our development goals. Thank you.